December 7th, 2019. I'm Clint Richardson filling in for Deanna today. Welcome to Spingola Speaks. Now it's Clint Speaks. I have a very special guest today that I'll be introducing in a moment. We're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about this strange world of genetics, which is, of course, a code word for eugenics. In fact, if you look at the old picture of the kind of famous picture now of the tree of the eugenics tree, you'll see, of course, medical and pharmaceutical, and you'll see genetics as one of the things that back then was essentially pretty much the keyword or the synonym used for eugenics. Because, of course, what you're trying to do in the eugenics movement is to sort of perfect the gene pool, if you will, to the promises, of course, that are made are ridiculous in the notion that you can get rid of certain diseases, make people immune from things, have designer babies, and all of these things. And one of the tools that are, to be clear, we've been brainwashed and enculturated and predictively programmed to accept this for many generations now through film, entertainment, to enter and hold the mind. Good old entertainment. Hollywood certainly has played its role in promoting the works of Huxley and all these other guys. Now, what we're going to be starting to talk about today is something called CRISPR. And CRISPR, I'm sure most people have heard of this by now, and you've probably heard some pretty serious discussions about it. It's a pretty frightening thing. It's a very frightening thing, actually. And I wanted to start out today. We've heard the promises. We've heard that CRISPR is easy and that it's cheap, but in terms of scientific study, etc., that it doesn't take much. There's a show on Netflix right now that I can't remember the name of it, but we'll talk about it in a moment, that actually portrays the people that are trying to make this just sort of an unregulated mainstream thing. And I can't think of anything more dangerous than taking a gene editing tool and just putting it out there. Now, I want to start off by reading a little excerpt from, it's called CRISPR Gene Editing in Health Magazine. CRISPR gene editing could cause hundreds of unexpected mutations, a study shows. This was from May 2017. Now, I want to make it clear here that when we're talking about CRISPR, you're talking about taking, in the traditional method, and we'll talk about the upgrades here as well when I introduce my guest, but we're talking about essentially cutting away a little portion of the DNA. It would be pretty much like cutting a wire or cutting some algorithm in half and replacing the information, and that's basically what it is, biological information, memory, that sort of thing, represented as letters. You've seen DNA before. Cutting it, replacing it with whatever you want to put in there. And the idea is, of course, that'll fix things. If I through the arrogance of men, if I just replace that one little thing, everything's going to be fine. I've rearranged the letters in the DNA because that's the comprehension I have of DNA that it's actually letters when it's not. There's no letters in nature. But, you know, the whole thing is ludicrous to think that we can interfere with nature's design like this. Now, CRISPR gene editing could cause hundreds of unexpected mutations, the study shows. Now, why? Why would that cause a mutation? Well, you've just interfered with a very tiny part of a much larger program. It's kind of like putting a virus in somewhere. It's kind of like putting in new information, but then not telling the information down the line, way down the line of that helix. Hey, we just changed something, better watch out. And by the time that those few little letters, you know, those few little changes come around, hey, later down the line, all these mutations start happening, cancers, all these different things. This is a warning, folks. We're entering into a war against nature, a war against the design, if you will, the laws of nature. And I think this is probably the most dangerous time in history as people are basically being told, hey, you can do this too in your basement. No problem. Here's a kit. I'll send it to you. You can do experiments, change this and make little life forms. And pretty soon you'll be able to make little elephants that you can have as a pet. And all these dinosaurs. Hey, why not? All these promises. Your babies will be perfect. You can have a perfect little black baby, a perfect little white baby. They'll be noticed, you know, perfect. No, this is never going to happen. And here's why. It's been hailed as one of the most potentially transformative inventions in modern medicine, bringing the prospect of designer babies closer than any other technology to date. But CRISPR-Cas9, that's CRISPR-Cas9, could be riskier than we thought. The technology that could spark a gene editing revolution, has been caught introducing hundreds of unintended mutations into the genome. And with scientists already testing it in humans, it set off some serious alarm bells. Gee, I can't imagine why, huh? We feel it's critical that the scientific community consider the potential hazards of all off-target mutations caused by CRISPR, including single nucleotide mutations and mutations in non-coding regions of the genome, says Stefan Sang from Columbia University Medical Center. He and his team have conducted the first whole genome screening of a living organism that's undergone CRISPR gene editing to discover that unwanted mutations can crop up in areas that are totally unrelated to the targeted genes. And this is what I mean. You mess with one thing to correct some, say, eye color as a designer baby. Well, gee, you've just messed up the pancreas and cut the link to something else, and this is going to cause cancer, and something's going to grow here where it's not supposed to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These mutations have likely been missed by previous studies because they've been using computer algorithms that are designed to identify and scan areas on the genome that are most likely to be affected based on what's been edited. Now, I want you to understand, folks, any good doctor, if there is such a thing anymore, any good scientist, if there is a real scientist out there, will say, we don't know how genes work. We really don't know how DNA works. We have this computer algorithm that is the best thing. It's our best guess. A guess based on hardly any knowledge at all. This is infantile stuff here. So for people to go ahead and actually think that they can, and they've already done this. They've already started making designer babies in China and places like that because the technology is cheap enough that you can practically do it underground. So the notion that you can do this just haphazardly without knowing anything hardly about what they're thinking. This sounds like great technology. But as far as the technological advance that this is like discovering in 1950 something or 1930 something, I can't remember. They discovered the first quote unquote virus, which was a tobacco plant virus, right? This is like them on a real weak powered microscope. Yes, it sounds impressive, but it's not. They don't know. And like I said, anybody with any salt will tell you we don't know. We do not know anything about this. It's all experimental. So think about that for a moment, too. I mean, here's my 2 cents. Any art can be called a science, right? If I'm a trash collection district, a municipal corporation, then I have an art behind and a science behind the way I'm going to pick up trash. The mail, there's a science, right? There's an art to delivering and sorting and all the mail. Anything can be called a science. Does that mean you're actually practicing science? Well, you look up the definition of science, it's the study of nature. Does mail or trash collection or really anything that we do qualify as that? The real question is, does CRISPR qualify as that? Because no, they're not studying nature. You're trying to alter it. You see, that's the difference. So this is an art. This is literally an artist reimagining or as it will, designing or redesigning the design of nature. Now, that should scare the hell out of you folks. That the fact that this is just going on wholesale, that pretty much anybody that wants to do it can essentially get the chemistry set to do it. Nature is by definition what? Reality, right? What is besides, what is outside of man's purview or design or even opinion. The truth is truth. It doesn't matter what we think is truth. So nature is that which is not man-made. That's the idea of creation, right? Computers and language are not part of nature. Just because I draw a helix and I say, and I do this computer test and it comes out with a bunch of numbers and words or symbols that represent reality does not mean I have a grasp on reality. Like I said, this is infantile. This is like, I mean, essentially reading that stuff is like reading Egyptian hieroglyphics without having a cipher. Computers, language, that's man-made. You cannot possibly suggest that you know something because you've turned it into a language. It's very scary, very arrogant. The use of computer algorithms as part of natural science is ludicrous in and of itself. To suggest that it's the same as the reality that's being represented. It's a useful tool, but it must be used very sparingly, not as an absolute, right? The laws of nature, the you cannot use something artificial and say it's part of nature. The design of nature is the point. And so what we're talking about here, you know, here's an article from the Daily Mail. The designer babies created using the CRISPR gene editing tool may suffer from hundreds of unwanted mutations, which, you know, now you have a couple children that are running around that are literally, I mean, essentially clones. They're not natural children anymore. The question becomes, do they have inherent rights? This is crazy. Unwanted mutations brought on by CRISPR in living animals could be more widespread than we thought. They sequenced the entire genome of 2 mice that had undergone CRISPR gene editing, and of course controlled it with one healthy mouse that wasn't exposed to that. They were looking for any mutations linked to the technology, including those that only altered a single nucleotide, molecules that serve as the basic building blocks of RNA, DNA, RNA programs DNA, essentially. You know, the results were pretty staggering. You're talking about deletions, insertions that appear elsewhere, but it's kind of hard to explain. It doesn't mean that CRISPR is unsuitable for use in humans, as it says. It just says more research is needed, which is kind of my point. This is not something that you just start doing. Let's see. I know I had some. How does it work? CRISPR technology precisely. My computer's not CRISPR technology precisely changes small parts of genetic code. Unlike other gene silencing tools, the CRISPR system targets the genome source material and permanently turns off genes at the DNA level. Now that's a good point to introduce my guest today, Jules. She is actually the founder and, well, she does everything over at UCY.TV, a network I went on after I left RBN to write my book and do all that. And I always respected her shows. Her shows were always about, this kind of stuff, everything from DARPA to what was going on with that, to all of this genetic engineering and manipulation and everything you can possibly think of, stuff that, I couldn't even imagine, has been happening, really. So that said, Jules, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Clint. Yeah, kind of like technology gone awry. I mean, it really has been, since they first started making these discoveries and messing around with AI, things have gotten so beyond control. In talking about people having CRISPR available, one of the very earliest stories I remember covering on this topic was a company named Adagene, and they had accomplished some CRISPR tests and everything seemed to work the way they thought it would. And so they said, well, this technology can't be in the hands of the pharmaceutical companies or the corporations. We have to democratize it. That was like a big key phrase for a while about, giving it all to the people for your own good. And so they sent out 60,000 CRISPR toolkits to 83 different countries. Now think about that for a minute. So when you were watching that Unnatural Selection, the documentary on Netflix about all this technology, think about that Josh Zahner, who was one guy, and then there was the other guy that was gene editing dogs that he was breeding. And it was he was kind of like in an outbacky area with this pen full of dogs that he was breeding, and then he was manipulating their genes. It was frightening, because I used to kind of joke about, people doing this in the garage or mommy's back bedroom. But I mean, this stuff has been released to the whole planet.
Right. So here's a guy, just to clear up, if you want to watch this documentary on Netflix, what was it called again?
Unnatural Selection.
Right. So it shows this guy essentially jacking off his dogs to get, semen.
He did, yeah.
Oh yeah, it was real pleasant to watch. And his idea is that he wants to corner the market to create glowing dogs. Something that you might have heard on the National Geographic Channel, that they inject some jellyfish or something that glows, or glow bugs, whatever, in the material into the cells, and then when they glow, they know it's cancer. They glow, they know it's this, something like that. But he's talking about actually altering the genome structure of turning switches on and off, basically, and how that works. Just think of your garage door opener, right? You get your garage door opener, you got to program it, because otherwise your garage door opener would open everybody's garage door opener. So you have a selection of switches that go up, in the middle, in a neutral position, or down, right? Pretty much up and down, or 1 and 0 in computer language. And so you're programming that to your specific garage door opener. So, and there's thousands of different combinations that could happen. So the chances of yours opening your neighbor's, is pretty not going to happen. The point is, you've programmed that to act a certain way and to communicate with another entity in the body. Well, now imagine those switches being billions and billions of switches, and any one that you turn on and off is going to affect something in your body. It could be anything, because that's what it does. It's the expression, the epigenomic structure is the expression of your genome or your genes, right? So here's a guy that wants to create glow dogs just because he wants to make some money. know how dangerous that is to introduce another animal's DNA into? I mean, think of that for just one brain. We'll be back. Alrighty, folks, welcome back. Oh, you're listening to Republic Broadcasting. We're talking with Jules today from UCY.tv. You want to go over there and check out her her handiwork. You can see all of my old shows, her old shows. Lots of people actually were over there being rebroadcast or broadcast on UCY. One of my favorites, I can't even think of his name right now. You had the Shaliak over there. You had quite a few people. It was good times. But so we're talking about this CRISPR technology, this all the promises they're making, and all the misinformation that they're putting out about it. And it is part of the genetics, i.e., eugenics plan, if you will, the furtherance of whatever you want to call that whole movement. Something I was surprised to find out actually started in the American universities. Before there was eugenics in Germany, there was eugenics in America. And Jewish Eugenics, of course, a book I have on my shelf, very important book. If you folks want to read the notion of what the Jew is, hey, Jewish eugenics is everything. Author is John Glad. I highly recommend it. Nothing controversial, nothing, just pure. He's the top guy on the subject, very respected. Mostly Jewish, or in fact, I think he says it's all Jewish sources. Nothing against the race, because it's not a race. It's actually something completely different. But the point is, it's a genetics club, essentially, an agreement between families, essentially. Here, what we're talking about is something that, I mean, you think about it, Jules, you're talking about correcting traits that are unwanted, which, if you go back into the history of the United States, especially the courts, some of the most celebrated judges that we have, or Supreme Court justices, were very, very horrible when it came to eugenics, forcing people to be sterilized. This was something, again, started in the university system, which I think is understandable if you look at the university system today and what they call the modern liberalism, if you will. It's happening again, is all I can say. The notion of what it was sort of a hopeful thing. The black community had its own eugenics, so this was a very racially oriented thing. Every race or creed or whatever had its own eugenics movement. The big movement in the black community, actually, in America as well. They want their own pure race. That's what it was all about back then, because that's what was being promoted in the university system. That's all part of my upcoming documentary. So, not my opinion. I'm reading it straight from the source. In fact, several universities have come out and apologized for their slavery and for their eugenics movements. It's a really interesting story. But what we're talking about now is, like you said, this sort of this backdoor thing that anybody can be a part of. These guys are sending kits to people. And here's a guy that wants to design dogs so he can make a profit and be the first to have glowing dogs that he can sell and get a patent on it and all that stuff. So this is the sickness that is going through society right now. This sort of action without consequence. Go ahead, it's legal, therefore it's okay, right? Don't think about the moral construct or even the notion that it's not science. This is pseudoscience. This is something completely different than the study of nature. It's the purposeful deception and destruction of nature's design, which can only lead to chaos. Did you notice these guys? I mean, for all intents and purposes, they were anarchists. I mean, kind of hard to overlook that.
Well, and you figure that that's the type of person that's going to be tinkering around with, recreating life. I mean, it's very disturbing because once they released this, then I remember Congress said, "Oh no, CRISPR could be a bioweapon." Well, no kidding. After they sent it to 83 countries and no one's really tracking what's going on with it.
Oh, oops. Wait a minute. We're so smart.
But, I
think they knew that before they sent it.
I think they did. I think that, you look at all the rich billionaires, and Bill Gates included, that are all calling for having to reduce carbon on the planet to save the planet, and we're all producing too much carbon. We're consuming too much food, which is producing carbon. So we need a population decrease. Did you see that? There was a story recently where they literally came out and said, to save the planet, we have to decrease the population.
Oh, absolutely. But, I mean, I don't know why people haven't complained or spoken up about just the United Nations and its population council is what they call it. I mean, yeah, this stuff is left over from the League of Nations and all that stuff, which was outright rejected because that's what it was. This was at the time when all these Twilight Zone type of stories were coming out, where in the future the population is going to be so ridiculous that you're not even going to be able to move. There's going to be so many people, right? The movies like Metropolis and those, this ridiculous notion that the earth is going to be full of people, so we have to depopulate. Well, that never went away. The think tanks that came up with that crap, it never went away. And they've been at it for a long time.
Well, I think they're really pushing climate change as the reason why this is all ethically okay. If you look some of the programs that they had going on through DARPA with their Insect Allies program. Did you ever read about that one? Where they were taking genetically modified bacteriophages and infecting insects. And I think the one story in particular was aphids. And then they were sending them onto the crops. So when they started nibbling on the crops, the phages would infect the plant with whatever their payload was. And it would genetically modify the entire crop within one growing season. And a lot of international organizations are crying foul on that, going, hey, that's a biological weapon. Right? I mean, you infect it. It's entomological warfare. That happened back in World War II. I think they were thinking at that.
Yeah,
the ticks. Look at the ticks. I still think the ticks were, and Lyme disease was some sort of biological warfare event gone wrong.
Out of what was that island?
Plum Island.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is now moving to Manhattan, Kansas.
If you noticed also that, like for instance, Monsanto, what happens to Monsanto? It gets purchased by Bayer Corporation, yeah. Right? Bayer Corporation being the big IG Farben spinoff, the war chest basically that went to Merck, and you think about that for a moment. Now, what are you seeing on TV? What we've been saying in this alternatives, sort of zone that we have out here that, can never break through to the mainstream. We've been saying that Roundup and all this stuff is poison. It's going to destroy people's, biome. It's going to cause leaky gut. It's going to do this, all this. And now all of a sudden you see these late night commercials saying, hey, it's been discovered that Roundup causes cancer or does this if you've been exposed. And man, I'll tell you, if you were to put all those late night commercials or daytime commercials on one roll of all these chemicals and all these companies that were, of course, made by Bayer or made by Monsanto, made by all these companies, you'd you'd have a documentary in and of itself, right? I mean, all these modern diseases that shouldn't by all rights exist because of all these chemicals, which of course chemicals are the main ingredient in drugs. So, which go into the water supply, and all those side effects that you see are then happening to us, if you will, naturally because it's in the water. So, like I said, it's a war against sanity, but it's a war against the natural design of nature. All the the fish being feminized. There's so many things happening that are destroying the biome that actually supports the invisible stuff, the microscopic stuff that supports our existence. And we're just sitting back letting it happen because it's legal, because it's a corporation. Corporation's a person too. Corporation has rights. Therefore, we can't go burn it down. I disagree with that at this point. This is war. We're literally at war. We're literally at a point where we can no longer suffer what people do because they have some status or flattering title or wear a white coat. These people are, I'm almost cussed there. These people are nuts. They're crazy, right? They're mentally challenged in a way that they have no moral rectitude or moral compass whatsoever. And trust me when I say that good people do not rise to the top, right? I've never worked at a job where good people rise to the top. So, I mean, what we're experiencing here, it cannot really, I don't think it can be compared to any time in history because, and I think right now is when the Bible is actually starting to make a lot of sense because it's talking about things that couldn't be understood until technology caught up with us. So I just can't see sitting back and watching this happen, which is what we've been doing in this alternative movement for so long, exposure of things without consequence. I just don't think good people can do nothing anymore. Maybe I'm going off the rails here, but as far as I'm concerned, this is a war against nature, and I'm part of nature. And it doesn't seem to matter which part of nature gets harmed, including me or you or your children, to further this pseudo-science, fake science that they're this eugenics movement essentially. And I this is getting out of hand. And I just don't see how good people can sit here and do nothing about this.
When you start looking at gene drives, which was something else that they talked about in another episode of Unnatural Selection, they were using gene drives on mosquitoes at first. That was the Oxitec mosquito that everyone was crying about at one point. They wanted to release them in the Keys, which I don't know if they did, but they did release them on Cayman and in Brazil. And then they built an Oxitec mosquito factory in Brazil. And just recently, I saw a story that said, whoops, because they let them loose, and it said, whoops, we were wrong. The mosquitoes didn't die out like they thought they were going to. So now they have these genetically modified mosquitoes that are flying around in Brazil.
So essentially the Jurassic Park model.
Kind of, yeah.
All right. Not supposed to be able to reproduce, but nature somehow finds a way.
Right.
Yeah.
But, by messing with the reproduction, I just saw an article that I didn't get a chance to post yet, but it was about standard birth control pills. Did you know that they did MRIs or CAT scans on somebody, people who were taking them and people who weren't, and they found that it completely affects some gland in the brain that affects the type of person that you're attracted to.
Yeah.
And when the women who are on birth control, that shrinking of that gland makes them attracted to more effeminate, less masculine men. And I thought that was interesting because, they're toying with all the sex, by messing with the sex genes and everything. It's going to reduce reproduction if people get all mixed up and animals get all mixed up. You said the frogs even.
Right. Well, we've been warning people about that I have at least for I don't know how many, 5, 6, 7 years, because I've seen it firsthand where a perfectly normal, healthy girl will get on the pill, and I've warned my neighbors against it. Nobody listen, but they get on the pill, and you're right. They start being attracted to people that they otherwise would not be attracted. You want to know why the divorce rate is so high? Is because you then get off the pill, you get pregnant, you get off the pill, and suddenly you are able to utilize that pheromone hormone response, and you realize I have no attraction to this person whatsoever. I have no attraction to this. It could be. I mean, I had, just as an example, there was a girl that was part of my We Are Change group when we had it here in Utah, and she was on all kinds of suppressants, antidepressants, antipsychotics, plus the pill. And she was so messed up in the head that she met a midget that had to wear an exoskeleton so small, and basically take care of him, thinking that it was a natural, perfectly normal. And the second that she got off those antipsychotic, antidepressants, and the pill, she's like, "What the hell am I doing? How did this happen? How? I can't even remember how I got into this situation, right?" And I'm not. That's not something that I'm putting down anything. But I mean, come on. You get into the point is you get into a very unnatural situation, and you're attracted to things you wouldn't otherwise be attracted to. Now, I don't mean offense, but I mean this is just the truth. Right? You have to say it sometimes, and it has to be offensive sometimes. There's some serious problems. Why is the divorce rate so high? Again, you get off the pill, you realize I married this guy probably because he made me pregnant, or I've been on the pill for so many years I wouldn't know who I'm attracted to in the first. And then all of a sudden, the woman, has no attraction, has an absolutely zero attraction to the husband. And I actually wonder sometimes if it doesn't even go further than that. And that's why people aren't attracted to their babies, because their babies have the same pheromone. What's that called? Postpartum depression, or where the woman,
oxytocin,
the mother doesn't like or feel like she's related or something to the baby. I actually wonder if that's not the same response.
It's hormonal. I mean, both of them are.
Right. And if you're suppressing the hormonal, I don't know. It's something that I think you said there's finally a study on it. I'm glad to hear it.
They also found that it caused major depression. I was very surprised because, I mean, you never heard anything like that before. Just, don't smoke because you could have blood clots. That was probably the only thing.
Don't do anything that's going to affect your natural design is the whole point. Don't CRISPR, don't change your DNA, don't switch on your epigenome. Keep in mind, folks, that when it comes to the epigenome, too, I mean, anything you eat an onion, it's going to switch on 45 different, or on or off 45 different parts of your genome temporarily. Right? Anything you eat, anything that enters into your body, all these drugs, all these so-called medicines, which are actually poisons, those alter and switch on and off your epigenomic response, and that is what causes the expression of disease or symptoms of disease, which is why with vaccines, you're having an allergic response, you're not having an immune response, and the vaccine, you're going to get the measles, but you're not going to express because the genome isn't switched on and off, you're not going to express the symptoms of the measles, and therefore your body, just like this CRISPR thing, your body, because you're not expressing those symptoms, is 2,000% more likely to have cancer. Because you're supposed to get the measles, you're supposed to get the chicken pox. It's part of nature's design. Right? That's why it was completely, you watch the Brady Bunch. They're like, yay, we have the measles. We get to stay home from school and we don't have to worry about actually being sick. Right? They've screwed us up so bad that with this kind of thing, and I'll tell you what, Jules, I think before there was birth control pills, I think I mean, maybe I'm wrong again, but if you're a certain culture, a certain family, a certain race, whatever, and you're trying to blend in to another race, another country, another ethnicity, whatever, well, then don't you think I mean, maybe is that perhaps why perfume was invented?
Interesting.
To cover up the pheromones, to cover up the fact that, hey, you and me aren't compatible after all. And again, this probably sounds racist because everything's racist today, but no, this is the way nature works. This is why certain animals won't have sex with other certain animals, and certain people won't have sex. This is serious stuff that we're messing with.
Well, one of the other experiments that they were doing on mosquitoes, instead of CRISPRing them, was using a bacteria called Wolbachia. Have you heard of that before? And the Wolbachia bacteria made the male and the female incompatible biologically to mate. And that was how, it killed them off.
Well, I mean, that sounds like the same thing, doesn't it?
Same basic thing. It's eugenics of sorts. I think when they were talking about the different types of eugenics with insects in particular, they were talking about population suppression was one thing that they were dealing with, and then the second was population elimination. And I mean, how long is it going to take before they start learning all these things and then going, maybe we could use CRISPR, to snippety snip or insert here. There's a new kind of CRISPR that doesn't cut anymore. It just inserts itself.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, actually, because I hadn't heard about that until you brought it up.
Yeah, that was they use a CRISPR transposon. I'd never heard of a transposon before, so I looked it up, and it's a semi-parasitic DNA sequence that actually just slips itself into a DNA strand. So, of course, there's not as many unintended consequences, but just like you said, it's like taking a whole piece of very complex software and editing a small piece of it. Somewhere down the line, that's going to cause mutations. And you were absolutely 100% right. What is a mutation? Well, mutations typically, when your cells get older and they don't correct injury or oxidation properly, that's when you get mutation, which typically turns into cancer. So don't get CRISPR. They
wait a minute. I mean, you're talking about something now that, I mean, how does that enter into your body? If you say it's parasitic in a sort of metaphoric way, and it inserts itself, all it has to do is get in you, right? So right. How is it delivered then?
Well, there's a couple different ways they've been looking at CRISPR delivery.
Who the hell is they?
They is
this
like
is what I
DARPA.
mean. We say they are doing it as if they is God and we can't do anything about it. This drives me nuts.
Yeah, DARPA actually was the top spending research institution on gene drives and CRISPR and how to get it into your body. They want to improve soldiers, and there's a whole new program for that too. But one way is putting it into an adenovirus, which when you get an adenovirus, it typically is just like a mild cold, but they take the guts out of the virus and they put the CRISPR machinery in there. So they could put CRISPR machinery into this adenovirus and then aerosolize it so people inhale it. And they think they got a little cold, a stuffy nose or whatever. And in the meantime, the CRISPR machinery that's been encoded with whatever to cut or to swap, there's this new type of CRISPR called CRISPR prime that instead of cutting or inserting, it now just flips letters. So it'll flip like a C to a G or a G to an A to make, difference in the sequence. But So they could do that through adenovirus. And then there's a new thing that they're calling a nano container, which are these teeny, teeny, tiny particulates that I would assume would be put into either a vaccination or, who knows, they could probably put it into food and then get it into the body. Patent-sized gene therapy and drugs into cells. So this was from December 6th, so yesterday. Scientists at Johns Hopkins Medicine report that they've created a tiny nano container that can slip inside cells and deliver protein-based medicines and gene therapies of any size, even hefty ones attached to the gene editing tool called CRISPR. If their creation, constructed of a biodegradable polymer, passes more laboratory testing, it could offer a way to efficiently ferry larger medical compounds into specifically targeted cells. A report on their work appears in the December 6th issue of Science Advances. Most medicine spread throughout the body in an indiscriminate way, and it doesn't target specific cells. Some medicines, such as antibodies, latch onto targets of the cell's surface receptors, but we don't have good systems for delivering biological medicine straight to the inside of a cell, which is where therapies would have the best chance of working properly and with fewer side effects. Many academics and commercial scientists have long sought better transit systems for therapies, and some commercially available techniques use a stripped-down form of virus known for its ability to infect cells directly to deliver therapies, although the non-infectious version of these delivery systems can unleash an unwanted immune system response. And that is what I was talking about before, the adenovirus therapy, where they put the CRISPR inside the adenovirus.
Alrighty, folks, welcome back. So sorry about that. My internet just went kaput. So frustrating, but we're back. Jules, apologize for cutting out on you there. Hopefully you you probably handled it just fine, though, didn't you?
Yeah, I've read something. It's okay. I was talking about the different ways that you could get infected with CRISPR.
Infected, right? Now suddenly we've gone from a scientific, application to an infection. Well, that should be a big red flag for anybody that they're calling it an infection, right? Because that means...
No, they weren't calling it an infection. I mean, you could get it through a virus that was airborne. That was something that they were tinkering with.
That's an infection.
Yeah, that is an infection.
I mean, you might not use the word, but I mean, come on, right? That's what inoculation means, right? It means to do harm, to infect with a disease. So, I'm sorry, but that is infection. And especially if it's something that, you put it into the air, that means you're necessarily targeting a non-controlled population.
Well, here's something interesting. I saw today on Netflix, there was some new show called V Wars. It's a series, and it made me kind of chuckle, sort of in a bad way, because it starts out where, because of global warming, everything is because of global warming. The ice is melting, and it released these ancient viruses that infected some scientists up there. And then, of course, they went offline, so people had to go investigate. And when people investigated, they became exposed. And, it goes from there. But I think that they're really priming. The fact that CRISPR got sent out to the whole planet without any controls whatsoever, and now they're crying that it could be used as a bioweapon, and they're getting in, all these Christmas DNA kits, $29.99. Send in your DNA and see if you're related to royalty. That's all been a trick, all of it. Yeah. They wanted the DNA database so they could start running algorithms against it to locate, of course, where diseases are, and of course, hereditary. They also want to learn how to manipulate those for their purposes. That's where the eugenics comes in.
Think about that for a moment. You're going to do a whole DNA sequence on somebody, and you're only going to charge them, $100?
Right.
How much? I mean, come on. You obviously, just like any information, they're gonna sell your information, right? Next thing you know, you're gonna have a clone that you don't even know about. So
Yeah,
it's
right.
it's it's nuts that anybody that'd be fooling us is enough, and apparently that's a lot of freaking people that would send their DNA, especially through the mail. The other one is poop in a box. Have you seen that commercial?
Yeah.
Poop in a box. Give us your poop, your DNA sample, and we'll send you back whether you have colon cancer. And by the way, we really have no way to tell if it's a false positive or not. Hey, come put your breast in this machine. We'll tell you whether you have breast cancer. Oh, but by the way, 1 in 5 is a false positive. But we're going to recommend that we remove your breasts anyway. Why? Because Angelina Jolie did it. I mean, the whole thing is turned absolutely nuts. It drives me nuts. Well, we'll be back, folks. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back, folks. You are tuned in to the Spingola Speaks radio program. I'm Clint Richardson, filling in today. Deanna's out doing one of her classes, learning how to heal people. Good on her. We're joined by Jules today. Jules is she's this really cool chick that runs a little platform called UCY TV. Although we've both calmed down a bit in our activism and our radio work, but Jules was kind enough to join me today because I've always respected her work and all the research she did. And at this point, this is more of a summary of past research than it is anything, but the amount of stuff that she has done, again, ucy.tv if you want to check her show out, which was a cup, what was it called, Jules?
Sorry, I was muted. Before the first cup,
that's right. Good stuff. All the archives are up there. Like I said, my shows are archived up there too. So we've entered into just this realm of insanity where no one seems to be responsible for their own, health, their own mental, acute, health. I don't know how else to say it. We're in a time when people have put so much trust in the white coats that there's no reason or logic left, and the notion. I mean, I'm really disturbed by this notion that a parasitic, right, free born CRISPR editing monster, a virus, if you will. I can't imagine what that, because like you said, just one snip and replacement like that down the line causes hundreds or thousands of mutations that can't even be guessed or accounted for until they happen. It's insane.
I mean, I don't even know what to say at this point about this. It's getting so out of hand. And it's now becoming, quote unquote, mainstream medicine, but it's not fully baked. And like you were saying, we don't understand, and we honestly don't understand all the ramifications or what this is going to do. You were talking before the break about Angelina Jolie, and the reason why she had the mastectomy, the double mastectomy, was because she had the DNA test done and it showed the BRCA1 mutation. That's why she did that. And with the poop in the box, I just saw a story this morning that somehow some of that information is being used for the microbiome database. I guess they're doing some mass microbiome database.
Of course. Send me that, please. I couldn't figure out how they were using that, but I knew they were. Oh, man.
Yeah,
and who's, of course, on this. So what I was doing is I was researching all these companies, and that was one that came up. Cologuard is what it's called. And of course, I was looking at the conflicts of interest of all these former secretaries of Health and Human Services, and that one what was her name? She was when George Bush, I think, was in. Kathleen Sebelius. Do you remember her?
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, well, she's got all these different companies that she sits on the boards of, and that was one of them, the Cologuard. So without her, the Cologuard would never have happened, right? So she's got all these conflicts, and every single one of those people that Trump appointed one that was used to be a pharmaceutical executive. Now he's the head of Health and Human Services, or was. So yeah, every single one of them has all these different conflicts of interest and making money off drugs, and drugs that would never come to market without them, being in the influential position to make it happen. And so they're, to take a job as human health and human services director is a very lucrative jumping off point, basically. And really scary when you actually think about that and look into all the things they've got their hands on. Well, she's got her hands on and sits on the board of the Cologuard company. And yeah, like you say, I sat there and I looked at it, and they're collecting DNA, but this is different somehow. Why are they collecting poop? And now that makes perfect sense. The
microbiome is hot research right now.
Yes. Thank you for clearing that up for me.
You're welcome.
I always listen to my instincts, but sometimes they never produce the words to describe it. But that makes so much sense now. And
there's
of course,
so much money to be made from our data. I mean, it used to just be your surfing habits, and now it's all of your genetic data.
Well, and people start, we better start realizing when they say this is the information age. Well, I mean, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about our information. And again, information is not knowledge, right? Information is not knowledge. So the difference between that is, of course, the information in form, right? Not substance, but form. So again, putting numbers up against the real thing, right? It's not knowledge, but it appears to be knowledge, right? So it's a very scary thing. And here's how it's described: DNA editing. A DNA editing technique called CRISPR-Cas9 works like a biological version of a word processing program's find and replace function. Now, I use find and replace all the time. If I'm doing a show and I've got my book or my research up in front of me, that's how I find exactly what I want to talk about. Okay, I know Huxley made a quote, or I know the two words that are together, and then I search for that, and it comes right up, and it sounds like I know what the hell I'm talking about, right? Because I could read it. And then that's what they're doing with DNA. They're looking for the damaged part. They know what to look for in their information, right? That which represents but is not actually, and they change that part, but inadvertently they're changing the whole damn thing. And I take it back. This is more like when they just learned that they could wash their hands and prevent disease. That's how uninformed and in the blind they actually are.
And what's even scarier is if you take that capability and then add the gene drive capabilities, which will push the change throughout an entire population. And that's what I was talking about before. Population suppression and population elimination are kind of the two techniques that they're learning about. I'd be concerned. I'd be concerned that we may be exposed at some point. And I mean, there's all these different ways to get it into the body and all these different, medical techniques now that they're trying and then going, oops. Don't be version 1.0. That's all I have to say.
Well, okay, so explain to me, I've heard the term and I've looked into it a little, but what exactly is a gene drive?
Well, the gene drive they put a mutation into a species. They CRISPR like all the females, let's say. So when the females then give birth, it's passed on to the next generation, and then it becomes part of the germline, let's say.
Right.
So if they wanted to affect the next generation's fertility, they could program CRISPR to somehow make edits, and that's why they're doing all this genetic discovery, is to figure out where to cut.
Self-editing, molecules. That's, craziness. The other aspect of this that I think is really important to mention, because what we're really talking about is the modeling, the computer modeling or the information modeling of reality, right? Talking about the Matrix. You're talking about a simulation of everything, a hypocrisy of everything. So you're really, we also have to bring up the, how do I say this and have it make sense, right? You also have to bring up the DNA, if you will, which is the blockchain of the AI, of the artificial intelligence, of the entire structure of, this computer system that's slowly taking over everything, and everything's being, all this information that's being, because of course the AI can't really do anything with reality. It can only do something with the simulation or the DNA information of reality. Once it gets a hold of that, and once there's a database of every single one of our DNA structures, right, and that is on the blockchain, and if you don't know what a blockchain is, you really should. It's where Bitcoin and all that operates. It's let's put it this way: it's like a neural network. It's every block is like a cell in your brain that holds a memory or an answer to a question, if you will, and that answer is blocked, is chained to the next question, and then chained to the next question. It's not linear. It's what's the other word? Non-linear. So every question is answered, or every reality is mapped into this sort of digital construct to where the AI can do whatever the hell it wants. It can say, okay, well, this artificial construct that I represent as Clint Richardson has a defect in this particular part of his DNA, and he has bad metabolism, a low cytochrome P450 in his D2, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know he's allergic to this drug. We need to get rid of him. Let's just give him a Seroquel or something that he's allergic to, and he'll be dead, and we're good, right? Or here's a whole population we want to get rid of. According to the AI's logic, let's release this particular thing into the air. So what we're really talking about is a way to, if you will, copy nature, reality, into a genetic representation of the code, feed that into the blockchain, which is sort of the neural brain of the artificial intelligence, and suddenly you have this control system unlike anything anyone can even imagine. Am I too far off here? Is that nuts?
Oh, no, you're right on the money. It's beyond frightening as to what the implications are to what they're doing. And, just our everyday interaction is feeding the machine more. I mean, as there's more surveillance, they're getting to the point where with some of these satellites and these super high-res cameras, they can map your gait. Like there's something called gait analysis that they can identify you by from, 1,500 miles up in the sky. Just think about that. And as they're giving control to AI over the entire radio spectrum, you saw that... it was called C squared, I think. Some sort of communication forum that DARPA had where they were trying to put AI in charge of the subdividing the radio spectrum so people wouldn't have dedicated radio slices anymore like they have now. They would let the AI, what's it called in communication, where you interleave the signals, but it does it really fast, so no one would even notice that they're not on dedicated bandwidth.
So a hidden signal, kind of.
Yeah, well, they'd be controlling the communications platform globally, AI, and being able to connect to all systems and surveil everything, and identify. I mean, have you seen in China, like when you walk, the ID systems that are on the street, they're doing facial recognition of everybody, but it's also watching the way you walk and whatever.
Yep. The way even your demeanor shows your attitude. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now they can do emotion recognition, and they can scan you with millimeter waves, so they could tell like what you had for breakfast, doing like a spectroscopic scan of you from, I don't know, 192 feet or something, I think it was, or 172 feet away. It's horrifying. I hope, to be completely honest, that by the time all this comes to fruition, I don't think I'll be here anymore. But, future generations, I think that this is a real problem. And I know I totally agree with you that this is a war, but do you or do you not think that this is too big to stop? Because I kind of come to Jesus.
That is the fear, is that it's gone to, the only thing, if I were to write this as a movie plot or a book plot, I would say the only thing that's going to save us is the notion of an EMP. If the sun burns all the ability of electricity and power out, so that we're back in the pre-industrial age, we don't have the take their power away, and they have there's nothing left for them to do. That seems to be the only plausible thing that would actually save the planet. And I know, again, that sounds like completely extreme and crazy, but I'm not so sure it's that crazy when you actually start considering these things. Let me give you an example here, just so we can really understand how this works. Now, a while back, Congress got together and they had all these expert witnesses, and they were considering whether or not to use cancer cells, literally cancerous cells, to grow vaccines on. In other words, as a substrate, the material that the vaccine will get, like a chicken embryo or something like that, except they're going to use cancer cells because they can control cancer. In fact, that's pretty much what a clone is, if you really take all the craziness of cloning away, and really all it is controlled cancer. You're controlling it's hard to put into words, but here is the craziness. Okay, designer cells as substrates for manufacture of viral vaccines. Right. So here again we have designer cells. Well, what is CRISPR but something that you can design cells with, right? The second biological. Here's what's important. This is why I think people might not understand about DNA, and why you shouldn't mess with it. This is back in 2011. The second biological activity of DNA that should be considered is its potential infectivity. If a genome of a DNA virus or the provirus of a retrovirus is present in the cell substrate used for vaccine manufacture, then the residual DNA has the potential, upon inoculation into the vaccine recipient, to produce infectious virus from this DNA.
I honestly don't know anything about the study that he was just reading about.
Did I go out again?
Yeah. Are you there?
This thing is driving me nuts. I apologize. Did I cut off?
Yeah, you just kind of.
All right, let me try this again, because this is really important. The second biological activity of DNA that should be considered is its potential infectivity. If a genome of a DNA virus or the provirus of a retrovirus is present in the cell substrate used for vaccine manufacture, remember there's talking about using cancerous cells, then the residual DNA has the potential, upon inoculation, to produce infectious virus from this DNA and thus establish a productive infection. So what they're saying here confirms exactly what you were saying, which is that DNA is infectious, right? An infectious virus from this DNA. So you're talking about a virus that carries the new information of the DNA expresses and injects that information just like a computer virus does into your computer. And it screws everything up. That's what CRISPR, especially this so-called parasitic CRISPR notion, is doing. DNA is infectious, folks. It literally injects itself or gets injected into a cell and changes the structure. That's what they're talking about releasing. And mosquitoes and everything else. Craziness! We'll be back, folks. Stay tuned. Alrighty, folks, welcome back. You're connected to the Republic Broadcasting Network. I'm Clint, substituting for Deanna today. Appreciate you staying with us. My guest is Jules from UCY.tv. I want to read a few studies here. These are actually straight out of my documentary. This is the kind of stuff that's going to be in it, so that there's no question that these are the official studies and what's so important about this is that these are the official studies. These are coming from what we call they, right? They know exactly what's happening. In other words, they know they're making a mistake. All the research is there. Anybody can find it. If I can find it, hey, you can find it, and they can certainly find it. But they're not looking, because that would mean that they'd have to actually think about what they're doing. And if they're not already sociopathic or psychopathic, well, imagine having a conscience and knowing what I'm about to read you. This one is Vaccine, Volume 28, Issue 19 from 2010. So, I mean, that's 9 years. Published in Elsevier, a probabilistic model for risk assessment of residual host cell DNA in biological products. Now, that's anything, including vaccines, but also anything that's injectable, basically, that has any kind of biological function, whether it's blood products or human growth hormone or something for diabetics, insulin. That's anything that has a biological structure. And it's very important to understand that this is why the whole population is sick. I'm proving that in triplicate, which is why this whole thing is going to be about 40 or 50 hours long by the end. This is a full comprehensive look into the whole reason our population is so sick. So here we have residual host cell DNA in biological products. In other words, for instance, vaccines, they grow the vaccine on a cancerous cell because they decided, hey, that's okay. And then they filter it out, and of course some residual DNA from those cancerous cells remains in the vaccine. Now, that's not my opinion. That is actually written on the vaccine inserts, which was in my first documentary on the subject. You have to understand, they know this is happening, and this is just one of many reports. And here's what it says in the abstract. It just says, biological products such as viral vaccines manufactured in cells contain residual DNA derived from host cell substrates used in their production. So you grow it on a human aborted fetal tissue. Well, then some of that DNA is going to be in the final product. Says it warns you right in the product insert. Again, this is not deniable. This is not debatable. It is theoretically possible that the residual DNA could transmit activated oncogenes and or latent infectious viral genomes to subjects receiving the product and induce oncogenic, in other words, cancerous or infective events. And like I said, a vaccine, really what it's doing is causing an allergic response. It's not an actual immune response. As far as causing immunity, it's your body reacting to all these ingredients, including DNA fragments. A probabilistic model to estimate the risks due to residual DNA is proposed. The model takes account of enzyme inactivation, etc. go to a different one, you see establishing, so it goes from the probability, now it goes to establishing acceptable limits of residual DNA. In other words, they know, now we have to say, well, how much DNA in a vaccine or other biological product is healthy and good and won't cause so much breakdown of your normal functions, because that's what it's doing. It's causing an autoimmune response. If you don't know what that is, it means your body attacks its own functions. If I inject squalene, a common adjuvant that's harvested from sharks, into my body attacks the squalene. The problem is my body also produces squalene, and therefore it starts attacking my own squalene. Squalene happens to be we'll call it the oil for your machine. Call it the lubricant for your joints. Why do you think you have so much pain and arthritis and so many things going on? Because you've injected something into your body that was blamed for Gulf War syndrome. Squalene, the most insidious biological weapon ever created, because it's literally breaks down your body. It causes lupus-like. I mean, the list is unbelievable. Again, in my first vaccine documentary, if you want to watch that, it's Lethal Injection, The Story of Vaccination, free on YouTube. This one says biological products can contain residual DNA from host cell substrates, and it's possible that such residual DNA could encode or harbor oncogenes and infectious agents and then transmit to the product recipients, in other words, vaccines or other biological injections, leading to possible cancerous or infective events. Again and again and again, it says this over and over, and then they set these limits as if one particle is not enough to do the damage. You go on, you see all these different reports, safety issues relating to the use of mammalian cells as hosts. Well, if I inject pig ovary into me, my body's going to attack my own sperm or my own ovary. It's going to cause me not to have children. That's how they control horse and human population. This is all known, and it's happening. We'll be back. Alrighty, folks. Welcome back. Just want to read a couple more of these, and then we'll resume our regularly scheduled discussion. But this just bothers me because, again, I want you to understand, folks, they know. If I found this, you can find it, they can find it. But what they do is they hire pharmaceutical companies to write their own. These all have no conflicts of interest. Any report I find that shows anything positive about any biological always has a conflict of interest. This one was funded by GlaxoSmithKline. This was funded by this, or this doctor has a financial interest in the product. That's the only time you ever find positive results in a study. Everyone else that's independent, always, without exception. There's thousands and thousands of them, but they only use. See, the drug companies only use the ones that they pay for, and that should tell you a lot. So here's one. Safety issues related to the use of mammalian cells as hosts. Risk assessment on the carcinogenic, cancerous, in other words, potential of hybridoma cell DNA, implications for residual contaminating cellular DNA in biological products. Of course, that includes vaccines, but a lot of other stuff too. Here's what it says. It says, where was that? Next page. My apologies. Tumor development at the injection site was observed in 2 out of 200 animals with the solvent only. While 3 out of 9 rats at the positive control group injected with the DNA showed local tumor development, etc., etc. It is concluded that at the high dose and numbers of animals tested, administration of DNA does not induce local tumor development. where I'm not looking at the right thing here. I'm sorry. And it concludes, therefore, unlikely that the risk of DNA derived from immortalized cells will exceed the level of generally accepted cancer risk. Now, I want you to see how they worded this, because this is one of those bad studies, okay? They tell you about all the cancer it causes, and then they say this at the end. Therefore, we're saying that nothing has changed. What does that mean? That this test that they did, all they're saying, the whole thing was just to say it will not exceed the level of generally accepted cancer risk. In other words, they already know that these things are causing cancer, that injecting DNA into the body causes that DNA to alter the epigenomic structure. They know there is already a generally accepted cancer risk, right? So, in other words, they created this study, showed that it causes cancer, and then said, but it nothing to worry about. It's no higher than what we'd already expect. They know that they're causing you and your family, whole generations, cancer, autism, and everything else. It's all in these reports. That's why I'm putting them all together. This one is a statistical approach to determining criticality of residual host DNA in, again, vaccines, etc. Right? What does it say? It says, such a link makes it possible to establish acceptable ranges of residual DNA size and amount. So again, they admit, they know, they absolutely are 100% know that DNA is floating around in these vaccines, and that DNA will alter your body and cause cancer and everything else. It will do exactly what CRISPR does. But the way they word it is acceptable ranges. There is no acceptable range of putting another animal or another human's DNA into your body. Do you understand? But to these guys, yeah, sure, no problem. This is absolute ridiculous. This final one says, it says, cellular oncogenes, which is what we're talking about being injected, can induce tumors following subcutaneous inoculation. This was a more honest study. So, I mean, go on and on. Overview of biological effects of addition of DNA molecules to cells. Inactivation of a tumor suppressor gene and activation of a proto-oncogene could give rise to cancer. What does that mean? It means you have all these genes, right, controlled by the epigenome, expressing themselves as something that will say, nope, no cancerous, no tumors, no cancerous cells allowed. What happens? You inject DNA that's tainted or different design, and they turn off those suppressor genes from expressing themselves. Suddenly, your cell says, "Hey, yeah, I'll take you on." It's kind of like the thing we were talking about earlier with the birth control pill. It's like, oh, hey, suddenly you look very attractive to me, cancer. Why don't you come into my cell, reprogram me, and I'll be cancer too? That's essentially what they're doing. They know it. It's in their reports. Absolutely 100% factual, scientifically proven, and yet all they say is, but, it doesn't exceed exactly what we expect, so there's nothing to report here. A certain amount of people are going to get cancer. A certain amount of people are going to get sick. A certain amount of people are going to do this, but it's okay. Jules, did you ever see Fight Club?
No, that's one movie that's been on my list for probably about 20 years, but I have not seen it.
There's a scene in there, one of my favorite scenes, actually, in any movie. That's a very clever movie. And it talks about the insurance industry, which is what he works for. And how if a car has a recall, and something that needs to be recalled, like say the brakes go out, they know that in, say, 10 to 15% of the cars, the brakes are going to go out. But if it costs less to just let it go and let that 10 to 15% of the people get into a crash and die, if it costs less to do that than to actually recall it, they won't do a recall. That's how the insurance industry works. If it's cheaper just to let people die from the mistake, they don't do a recall and hope they don't get caught later on. That's how it works. And that's essentially what they're saying here. We know we're going to cause a shitload of, a buttload of, oh, that's bad too, a just giant amount of cancer in the population, and they have. And they're not doing a thing about it until again, we say enough is enough. Take all of the salaries that these CEOs of drug corporations have made, turn that into research that will actually prevent all of this. Until we do that, until we just completely deconstruct what has been constructed in the corporate structure, we're screwed. We might as well accept our fate. That's all I have to say. I mean, like I said, we're at war. We're at war with principalities. We're at war with corporations who we pretend are real and have the same power and rights as we do. That's our problem.
You know, what's interesting about that, Clint, is I read a book called The Biology of Doom, and it's about the history of the biowarfare program in the United States. And one of the things I didn't know was the very first head of the biowarfare program was Merck.
Oh, yeah.
Papa Merck.
Absolutely.
And vaccines actually came out of biological warfare as our protection against it. So I just thought it was interesting that vaccines and biological warfare came from the same source.
Modernly, yeah, absolutely. Because, well, and, consider soldiers are the number one guinea pigs for all these experimental vaccines, which is, again, why you had this Gulf War syndrome and all these problems, why soldiers are having kids that have fins instead of arms and legs, right? Why? I mean, there's so many different things that are going on. And, what do you expect? You're signing over all your rights, basically. When you join the military, you become their guinea pig. You don't have any, you don't have any say in it. And, I have firsthand experience in this because my dad had he was sick from Agent Orange poisoning, and he got 100% disability for his active duty over it was Korea or Vietnam or whatever. And since then, one of my uncles has been helping people get that 100% disability, because they don't go out and give it to you. You have to actually find out about it first somehow, and then get it. So, I mean, you're again, they know, but they're not doing anything to help anybody. If you find out about it, yeah, great, you can get all your medical bills covered. But if you don't find out about it, you're gonna be sick the rest of your life. You're gonna get all diabetes, high blood pressure, everything my dad had. And you know what? Too bad. If you didn't do your due diligence to find out you were poisoned in Vietnam, that's your fault. And now Monsanto, the company that made Agent Orange, is now part of Bayer Pharmaceuticals. I mean, how are we still even alive?
I don't know.
God.
It's crazy. I mean, everything is poison. And, getting back to CRISPR, it's not just people that they want to CRISPR. They're working on CRISPRing crops and animals and insects. Everything to, for droughts or diseases. I guess there's some new banana disease that bananas are going to go extinct, or pork, that swine flu that they were getting, that all the pigs are dying in China. They have this CRISPR pig farm that now they're trying to find a way to have them CRISPR them to be resistant to that virus.
Because that'll cause hundreds of mutations and they'll be allergic to something else. And why is that happening is the question, right? Because they've been, I won't say cloning, but they took bananas and took all the traits to make this certain kind of banana, and then virtually ignored or destroyed all the other types of banana that would actually not, already be immune to whatever virus this is, right? So it's not a problem with nature's version of the banana or many versions of the banana. The problem is that man came in and said, well, this is the best banana. We're going to only use it, and we're going to say screw all the others or limit them or cut them down or whatever. That's what we do to everything. I mean, that's essentially the same thing as eugenics.
Pretty much.
We've eugenicized bananas.
It's horrible, though. I mean, they are working on completely destroying and then replicating in some sort of synthetic or man-directed format every form of life, down from humans to bacteria.
And what does that mean? It means it's no longer a product of nature, therefore it can be patented. That means everything on Earth will be property.
Well, it makes you wonder, these people that are getting CRISPR'd, is that CRISPRing going to be copyrighted?
Well, I mean, why? Again, we got to be honest. There is no reason for these corporations to collect DNA information or even to go through the process of doing all this if it wasn't for the purpose of someday saying, well, this is property. All we have to do is make a couple changes to it, and we've created a new life form or a new design. Right? It's called novel. Novel's unique, right? It's created by man instead of nature, and that's the rule. You have to have something that's not naturally occurring to make it into property or a patent. And then, of course, you go into, there's so many offshoots of that. You're gonna have a heart transplant, and if you don't pay your bill, they'll come repo your heart.
Wasn't that in a movie once?
Yeah. Why? Because it's predictive programming.
Oh, there was a repo man.
Yeah. And if you don't think that's a true thing, I mean, I don't know what to tell people. I really don't. Science fiction is no longer fiction.
No,
it's predictive programming. So, yeah, I am so, and like everyone else, like you, I think there's this helpless feeling of being a spectator in all this. No matter how much due diligence and research we do, it doesn't feel like there's nothing we can do by just sitting here. I mean, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face or till we're CRISPR'd in the face, but what are we doing? What are we doing about it? And the answer is nothing. And I'm truly bothered by that. I don't know if you feel the same way, but that's the feeling I get on most issues today, is that we've talked about it long enough. And if we're not going to do anything by now, knowing all this is happening, then we're not going to do anything ever.
I mean, it's like a slow motion train wreck. And for as much as you talk about it, people get it, but they don't quite get it, I think. And they're like, nah, the scientists know what they're doing. And I think that's what a lot of the whole anti-vax push was about, was to try to discredit anybody who was raising any type of flags, no matter how much proof they had. They got everybody to just go, it's one of those people, So people won't listen. And I mean, they wouldn't listen before, but there's so many crazy things going on right now that are above the heads of most, everyday people, that you're not going to get a large group of people together that are going to put a stop to it. I mean, I think that's a sad reality, to be honest.
No, and, even if you do what I wanted to do, which is to get like-minded people and get our own place, our own town or our own, 100 square miles of land, if it's airborne, if it's waterborne, if it's foodborne, if it's mosquito-borne, then you can't escape. That's why I say it's either stop it now in its entirety, or we will be the consequences. I mean, we're the consequences. We're the worst possible scenarios I can think of are it's the only thing I can think of is going to happen to us if we just stay silent like this.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, when I say silence, that means not doing anything. We can talk about it. That's still silence because you're not actually taking, this in consideration, actually going out, whatever. So hard not to say some things, isn't it? We'll be back, folks. Alrighty, folks, welcome back. Just a short segment here before we go to the next hour, and anyone that wants to call in, it's 800-313-9443. That is 1-800-313-9443. We'll take callers at the first of the hour. Like RBN here, I have also, I purposely took myself away from social media, as we call it, because I could see what it was going to do to people. It was going to cause this sociopathic, narcissistic, dopamine-driven response kind of thing. That the only thing that makes you happy is your thumbs up, or the only thing that makes you sad is thumbs down, and you want to kill yourself. And that's why I didn't want to be part of social media. And like RBN, I'm now, of course, how do you break out of this alternative spectrum, but to try to break through social media into that other realm. I'm doing the same thing. I now have a Facebook page and a Twitter page that you can find on my latest blog entry at realityblogger.wordpress.com. It's a YouTube channel, and I've started up my new radio show, or my old radio show, which is called Red Pill Sunday School, Season 2. I put my first episode up just yesterday, actually. I think it was yesterday. And tell you what the show is going to be about, what we're going to be talking about. And I wanted to ask you guys a favor, and that is to, I hate to ask, but subscribe. Subscribe to my YouTube, subscribe to my Twitter, subscribe to my Facebook if you're already on those platforms. I know a lot of people have dumped them because of obvious reasons. The reason I'm asking you to do that is because I'm actually writing a book proposal and trying to get published. I'm looking for a literary agent and need to show that I have people out there that, listen, that I have an audience. And, of course, a publisher is always looking for people who would potentially make a purchase of a book. So, I mean, that's my honest plea to you. I don't want your money, but I do need to show that I have an audience out there. Otherwise, again, how do you escape this alternative? How do we get the message? How do we break through this sort of self-induced barrier that we've created for ourselves as being alternative and not mainstream? Well, we've kind of dug ourselves into our own little prison, if you will. And I totally understand why, that RBN needs to do the same thing. We've fallen under the sort of trance of some of the gatekeepers, I think, that have convinced us that we should not be mainstream. Well, mainstream, that means the entire population. So why are we keeping ourselves from that? My 2 cents. Jules, any other websites or information you want to give as well?
Well, you mentioned the UCY.tv, and I have a page there, and Before the First Cup is my show. I have a Twitter feed. Julie Stan1 is my handle, and that's about it.
All right. Very nice. You're my first friend on Facebook. We'll be back, folks. Stay tuned. Taking callers. Alrighty, folks, welcome back. Well, we're in the third hour here. Just 1 hour to go. Hopefully, I didn't actually officially ask, but Jules, if you'd like to stick around for the last hour and take some phone calls.
Sure. All
right. Well, it's 1-800-313-9443 if you'd like to call in today. Maybe we've said too much. Maybe people are afraid to talk to us. Don't be afraid. It's okay. I'll tell you, there's no callers right now, so lines are open. But And like I said, this feels so different for me now. Going learning all this stuff over the so many years, over a decade, and 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 sort of like imagining what it would be like to be in the situation where it's actually coming to fruition. And I guess I never really, some part of me, maybe like everyone else, thought, well, this stuff can never happen. It's too advanced. I mean, they thought the same thing about cell phones 30 years ago. You can't have a wireless connection, and now, I mean, look at how fast everything's growing, and it's growing to the point where, yes, they can now edit DNA. That's huge. And imagine when they get even smaller than DNA. Who knows what's inside of DNA? They don't. So, I don't know. It just feels like I feel differently now. I feel like the damage is now done. It's not that the damage is coming, it's that the damage is done. And that's a kind of a horrible feeling. I don't know. Do you get that same sort of feeling?
Well, yeah. I mean, I hate to be a downer, but
right.
When I stopped doing my show last June, I had kind of come to that point where, I could raise the alarm bell every single day about the next crazy thing that they just announced. But I mean, I think the train has gone too far. There's a new type of gene drive that's called an allele drive. So instead of just doing mass changes, they can just flip certain genes. So it's much more precise now than gene drive was. And I do think it's gone too far. I mean, I don't see how we would be able to stop this. And they're all saying that this is in the name of, longevity or climate change, is to make everything green. And, we're not going to be able to eat because there's too many people and all this climate change. So let's CRISPR the crops, to make them drought resistant. Or I saw they were CRISPRing honeybees. I mean, it's just horrible.
Right. Let's take something that we know that at least half the population will die off if this particular species dies off, right. And let's alter it. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, I remember a while back too, there was an organization that was dedicated to saving the bees and researching the colony collapse disorder.
Sure.
And I think it was Monsanto. It was Monsanto or Syngenta, one of the companies that was making the pesticide that fingers are being pointed at, actually bought the company. So I doubt there's much in the way of research into,
Well, and that's why the number one thing I constantly preach against is money. Is if money is your main concern, if you do things for money instead of do things for charity and love, there is no getting out. You're going to get. There is an amount of money out there that you can be paid and that's because you accept money for, that it actually has value. That you believe that it actually has a value when it doesn't. It's not of nature. It has no value. It has no existence except what you give to it. And yet everybody has a price, right? Everybody. That's the problem. And I guarantee you, they can make up a number on a journal, give themselves a loan, give that money to you, and then write it off. There's no limit to what they can give you, and that's the problem. There is no getting around that. We're either going to have to leave the system and let it sink to its own demise, or we're going to participate in the system and volunteer, and we're going to be the scientists, and we're going to be the clinicians, and we're going to be the people who destroy ourselves, and we're going to be people who sit back and watch it happen. And I know the final thought I have is, when you're talking about this, you're talking about traits, right? That's what the genes control, your traits, whether you express certain things, whether you express certain emotions, whether you express blood clotting, whether you express everything is controlled by this epigenomic response. So if you're talking about expression of traits, well, I ask you, where's the outrage? Where's the anger? Where is that feeling, that gut feeling that says, if I don't stop this meteor from hitting the Earth, we're all going to die? Where is it? I mean, I think it was you that told me that there's the younger generations, when they're polling them, when they're asking them questions about their perspective on things, they're like, we don't care if it's the end of the world.
Yeah, that was just recently that came out. There's just a complete apathy.
Absolute apathy. And that's an expression of the genome. But I hate to say it, it's not just brainwashing. It's not just what we call education. I mean, there's something more going on. And, I could sit here and I could read the Steiner quotes or the Huxley quotes about vaccinating against spirituality, against the part of the brain that allows you to be religious or have moral, spiritual thought. It's a well-established, set of lectures that several different people, including Rudolf Steiner, did. Whatever you think about it, when it's mirrored by several different authors, you got to start to wonder: have they been vaccinating us, even if they don't know it? Have they been vaccinating away our conscience? Have they been vaccinating away our spiritual ability to respond to things? I mean, I ask that question in all seriousness.
Well, I think Western society has kind of bred the survival instinct out of us.
Yeah, but like I said, I think is it breeding or is it eugenic cleansing? Is it, is it inoculation? It's hard to know the difference anymore. What do you guys think? It's 1-800-313-9443. Let's go to Pam in Connecticut. Welcome, Pam.
Hi, Clint. Hi, Jules. I just crawled out from underneath a rock. So, believe me, I'm grateful for this information and your websites. I'm just really grateful, and thank you about what you're getting into now about...
Well, we're glad you called, and we're glad that you came out from under your rock. We all have to at some point in our lives, and nowadays it seems even more, more important. And I'm sure that right now you're trying to form a question in your head, but probably can't because this is very overwhelming, isn't it?
Well, actually, I've worked in science and academia, and I have no respect for them. I finally woke up. I was so brainwashed. And yes, I understand about them really trying to get rid of the God gene, spirituality. And it's frightening. I don't have much to contribute, but, now I'm...
Well, what is it that made you come to that particular conclusion?
What conclusion? That it's spiritual warfare?
Yeah.
It's been ongoing for me now. I mean, that's my new frontier, is figuring out the Christian identity. I've been sort of educating myself about that, and the fact that when I had some kind of Christian identity ministries, that it was banned access to that, and just that we're not allowed religious freedom. We're not allowed to try to understand, what I came upon. What is his name? Nordstrom. Anyway, just these Christian identity pastors, and how they're in them themselves. There's this I guess, I'm sorry. There's just all this, there's traitors in the movement, and just trying to understand, this dual seed. I'm just very much a neophyte in this understanding of what's going on.
Technically, we all are. There's powers in place that I don't think any of us can ever truly, grasp. Their ultimate goal or their ultimate reasoning, for that matter. So, and that's probably a good thing, because what we're really talking about are sociopaths. We're talking about psychopaths. So the fact that you feel like a neophyte, the fact that you feel confused, just as I do, and just as Jules do, just because we have all this history of research, doesn't mean we can understand the psychopathic mind any more than anybody else. But it is certainly time to recognize that element is in charge, that element has been, that those royal families have been in charge for way too long, and they continue. And there has to be at some point where that is no longer the case. And, whatever that takes is what I'm saying. And again, we can't sit here and say it's time to literally pick up arms and revolt and do all that. I mean, it has to be something organized and meek and whatever. But so it's really hard to talk about the subject when you're talking about the notion that even the Constitution or the Declaration or whatever says that when your government is essentially so corrupt that it's time to alter and change that government. That was a statement that reflects all governments, not just this one. So it's a very tough to speak in that vein without coming off and sounding bad or terrorist or whatever word they're going to put on you to shut you down. And there's a word for just about anything you're going to talk about, which will again shut you down. So I trust me when I say I and certainly Jules and probably most of this audience has your exact frustration and will wanting to do something about it.
Yeah. So the person that I just discovered was Dr. James P. Wickstrom. And basically, I think it's Coventry People's Ministry have put he's now deceased, but I guess he's been deceased for a year, but they put his Bible studies on this way back, website. I forgot what it is, but I'm always going to be a neophyte, but no, I hear what you say, and I just want to tell you and Jules that you didn't waste your time today because you woke someone up a little bit more. Well, so I want to tell you how much I appreciate both your efforts, and I'm going to pay attention, okay? So,
well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for calling.
Okay, bye.
Jules, got anything to say about that?
Well, that was very nice of her to call.
Yes.
The one thing I was thinking about before her call is that, you mentioned this at the beginning, that you didn't realize that the universities were involved a lot in a lot of the science and stuff.
Well, basically the foundation of it all.
It is a foundation, and they're taking our children and giving them money, the government, especially DARPA, handing out grants for our children to be doing research and figuring out all different ways to splice and dice the genome.
Well, and, I couldn't figure out why that was. Why are the universities all involved in so much? And it turns out education is like the least of what universities do. Then you've got the for-profit sports industry. The NFL is actually a non-profit corporation, if you can believe that. We allow that to happen, too. So then you have this part of the university system that I didn't know existed, which is patenting. The number one patent holder of just about everything is universities. And reason for that is because then, of course, that's basically government. So you've got universities involved in these secret, or I should say unpublicized patent wars, where when one university science department, or, it can be machines, it can be anything, but especially in the medical fields, because it's so profitable, they're coming up with a discovery and then they're patenting it. And in the meantime, another university did the same thing, and they're battling each other billions of dollars in the courts trying to decide who's going to get the patent. And I'm like, wait a minute, why do they have patents, right? They're getting all these grants and everything, and then they're saying, well, whatever we do is our property. These things are supposed to be there for the good of humanity, the good of society, and yet here they are, these massive patent-holding machines. And you want to know why everything's so messed up? Well, they're constantly spending money to protect those patents. And you want to know why medicine is so expensive? You want to know why everything is so screwed up? It's because these universities, they don't do education. Education is like their disguise. They're in the patent business.
Yeah, research is a big part. I remember at school that a lot of our professors spent most of their time doing research and really didn't care about teaching classes.
Oh, yeah, because that's where the money is, right? I'm disgusted by it. Anyway, it's part of my whole expose that I'm doing. So let's go to Tim. Tim, I think that's Wyoming.
That's right.
Greetings.
Thanks for, thank you. Greetings to you too. Thanks for exposing the things that you're exposing on the radio here. Well, on the radio, over the internet, however you want to think about it. But you were talking about I want to go back to something you talked about probably an hour ago or so. Something about the interspersing or interleaving, if you will, of frequencies, radio frequencies, where people
Yes.
don't even know if they're on FM 101 point whatever. No, they're not. They're on, it's a like digital spread spectrum telephone kind of a thing, like where they can, like the code division multi-access for telephones, for cell phones, that kind of thing. And I think that when the FCC decided to sell off the frequencies that they did, they decided to they gave the companies the right to do whatever they want to do to the radio frequency, whether we like it or not. I mean, if you're an amateur radio operator, even if you use CB or something like that, if you want to listen to shortwave, no matter what you do, you're subjecting yourself to whatever the regulations are that they say. Well, this frequency is verboten, so to speak. I mean, you have to, there are jamming frequencies out there too. I've heard those just listening to shortwave.
I'm interested in this topic, but we're going to go to break. So hold on the phone, and we'll talk about this when we get back. Stay tuned, folks. You're on Republic Broadcasting, and we're talking to Tim in Wyoming. If you want to call in, we still got time for a few more callers if you'd like. 800-313-9443. Now, Tim, did I hear you correctly when you said that if you're listening to, say, a frequency, let's just say on the radio, or if you're hamming it, that there's I forgot the term, a residual or a hidden frequency that you're also listening to?
That's not exactly what I said, but no, what I mean is, what I was saying is, if you're trying to, there used to be a lot more radio stations, so to speak, on shortwave.
Terrestrial.
Terrestrial. Pardon? Terrestrial, right? Terrestrial, yeah. On terrestrial radio, yeah. I mean, that's. I mean, for the last couple of years or few years, I've been listening mostly to over the internet radio, I guess you'd say, because that's how I listen to RBN, among other things. But But when I've listened to even with a high-end radio, this I don't have a high-end radio, unfortunately. But even if you listen to a shortwave frequency, sometimes there's another frequency. Unless you have something that goes into like 6 decimal points past the zero, or 6 points past the zero, or past the decimal point, you can't even get that frequency, because there's so many other frequencies that are jamming on top of it. I say jamming, okay, maybe that's not exactly what they're doing, but for all intents and purposes, they're making it so you can't listen to that particular frequency anymore. You're hearing something that you may have once heard, and okay, you're getting some information that you're not hearing from the, as you were saying earlier, the mainstream media, which we are all mainstream, of course, but that as you're not getting the information that you want to get. You're getting filtered. You're getting reduced. You're getting dumbed down. You're getting in some cases you're not getting it at all. But the thing about it is, if you're trying to listen to something and you hear it's like an oscillating frequency, sort of like I say, sort of like a jamming thing. But when the FCC decided that they were going to sell off frequencies to companies to allow them to do whatever they want to do. I mean, all the telecommunications industry of America, I think the International Telecommunications Union as well, they are beneficiaries of those frequency sell-offs. So when that happened, it gave us less bandwidth, so to speak, less to listen to. We can't hear the things that we used to be able to hear because the frequencies have been taken away. The ham radio operators.
He can't use the frequencies. In other words, I mean, the audacity, the arrogance, the just sheer ridiculousness of saying that I own a frequency. I mean, that in and of itself is pretty nuts. I understand the regulation part of it, but the notion that somebody or something, some corporate structure owns a frequency is absolutely ludicrous, especially when you consider Rife and all these different people who studied, Pauling and all these, who studied frequencies and how they control health and how they, can destroy disease and everything. Now, how does that apply to what you were saying, Jules?
Well, the Grand Spectrum Collaboration Challenge, which is what I was referring to with DARPA, is going to take all of those allocated frequencies that right now they do. The FCC has auctions, and companies pay big bucks to own a spectrum, and they're going to let an AI multiplex those frequencies. So from what I understand, it's going to take the place of the FCC allocations that they currently have now. And I do have that map laminated up on my wall upstairs of that. There's a huge radio frequency map that has very tiny slices, and if you zoom way in, you can see who owns every little bit of the frequency map. But the military wants to get their hands on some of those frequencies, so they're figuring if they can multiplex them, they can share.
I'm sure that they can get their hands on it anytime they want to. Jules, how do you know you've been in this too long?
I don't know.
You have a map of that in your room. That's how you know.
It's pretty cool though. It's a really cool map. But I know what he's saying though, that they've probably subdivided these slices down to like the 1,000th of a millimeter or whatever. Yeah. So unless you have a digital radio that has that many decimal places, you're not going to be able to get them anymore. Well, and way back when they were using stuff like that for spy communications, like the number stations and that.
Well, so is it possible then, Tim, I guess the best way to ask this is, since there really is no actual, again, man has assigned numbers that represent certain frequencies, but there really is an unlimited number of frequencies if you can fine-tune the receiver, right? You can pick up just one tiny little fraction of a frequency
Right.
if the technology is there. So you can't really say there's only this many frequencies or that. So how does that apply then? If I can take my big clunky car radio and it picks up, as you said, it picks up only the percentage, the 1 decimal point, but there's actually unlimited decimal points. So how does that work?
Well, you'd have to have a specialized antenna and a very strong receiver. I mean, and especially when it comes to the point where they're digitally encrypting the signals. If you don't have a digital radio, a radio that'll actually, well, okay, I'm not a ham expert. I'm not an amateur radio expert. I'm actually not an amateur radio operator at all. But I know a lot of people that are, and they talk about how. Well, I mean, I've seen their radios. Some of them are just the older style. Even they go to like 5 decimal points past the, and I mean, just to pick up frequencies, just to transmit. And of course they have digital encryption, and they have burst transmissions. And I mean, supposedly there's this thing called moon bounce. Okay, I've heard of people doing it. You can actually bounce a signal off of the moon and hit some other part on the Earth instead of using a satellite or something like that. But I don't know that I don't know anybody who's done it. I've heard of it being done, but like I said, that's another kind of specialized transceiver, transmitter and receiver that you'd have to do something like that, and a very, very high-powered, very strong receiver, and of course it all comes to antennas too. I mean, if your antenna is not sufficient for the task, you'll never pick anything up. I once upon a time, I lived in another area. I had a fairly decent, well, it was just wires, but I had a fairly decent shortwave radio set up, and I was able to collect signals, you might say, from all over the place, and it was very surprising to me that there were so many more frequencies, so many more stations out there than I ever realized were there, and that was with just my older radio, which only goes to 3 decimal points after 3 points after the decimal. So, and
I guess what
like I said,
what kind of concerns me about that, again, that notion that there's just really an unlimited almost frequency spectrum, and again, considering all the work that those scientists have done about how certain life forms, certain parasites, certain amoebas, certain cells are destroyed by a certain frequency, and that there's a healthy frequency and a bad frequency, and you could even go to the point where they decided, the Rockefeller Institute decided that music would be set at 440 instead of whatever it was, I can't remember, 436, or I can't remember, but 432. And that's an unhealthy frequency as compared to the 432 megahertz. All of that stuff is sort of freaky to me, because that means that anything that's being amplified as a signal is probably going to affect your body, some cell in your body or something, and you don't even know it's happening. That's the thing.
Well,
that,
go ahead. Yeah, I don't know. Think about the thing. I was actually just 5G. Let's say just 5G. Okay, are people really thinking about what 5G? They think, oh, this is going to be great. I can do all this stuff with my phone. I can carry my device around, my idiot box, as I call them. I mean, their stupid phone, or whatever you want to call it, the thing they carry around in their pocket that's constantly irradiating them and constantly giving off their location, and constantly listening to them, and constantly using the camera to take pictures of wherever they happen to be and everything else. And it's the idiocy of people carrying their own spy box, their spy device around with them, their surveillance device. They're accepting that this is okay. They're saying, this is fine. I'm connected. I'm glad to be able to communicate with all these other people. Great. Go find a payphone. Do that.
And yet somehow I'm more miserable than I've ever been. I'm more unhealthy than I've ever been. I'm more unhappy than I've ever been. But it's great.
Yeah, because all these other people are happier than me, so it makes me unhappy. Yeah. Or something like that.
Well,
anyway, I'm going to get off the phone. Yeah. All right. Thanks. Bye.
All right, man. Yeah, interesting point, definitely.
You can't find a payphone if you even try to,
Yeah, they're getting harder, definitely. I think there's certain places that still, I think by law, there has to be some, but yeah, it's getting, especially, we could spend the whole segment talking about FirstNet, which is the reason why they're introducing all this technology is to have their own personal internet, and what better way to introduce the FirstNet than to say, well, it's for the first responders, That's why they're always making these guys out to be heroes, police and firefighters and all their games. Like, what are you talking about? It's a job that most kids try to get out of high school because they know they're not heroes any more than anybody else is a hero for going to a job that pays them. I'm sorry. I know that's not, the popular opinion, but come on, you got to stop. Because then they use that the soldiers and the police and they're all heroes, right? Even though they're paid mercenaries. Then they use that and say, well, they need their own internet system, which means basically the government needs its own internet system. I'm sorry, I don't pull any punches here. It's all propaganda designed to make you think, well, yeah, government needs its own internet that's not accessible to the public. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, it does if you think, well, gee, these first responders, they need their own. Well, yeah, that's it just drives me nuts. Let's go to Chance in I think that's West Virginia. It's been so long since I've done states. I think it's been since high school. So West Virginia, am I right there, Chance?
Yes, it is. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Mr. Richardson. I think you would make a great addition to RBN as having your own regular show.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm already a subtraction. I had the addition. I was the addition. Now I'm the subtraction.
I would look forward to that. You have a good speaking presence. You're very knowledgeable. And did anybody ever tell you, if I were to close my eyes, you sound like you, did anybody ever tell you this? You sound a little bit like, remember that Everybody Loves Raymond, the main character, Ray Romano? You sound quite a bit like him.
No, I have not heard that one.
Yes, you do. Okay, the point I called you is this. Now, I had to step away from the radio periodically many times during your show due to chores I had to do. I heard you. Yeah, what can you do, right? I heard you mentioned earlier Monsanto. And it brought to mind, years ago I had to go through chemotherapy like millions of other people have across the country. I found out after it was all done that the ingredients in chemotherapy drugs are actually mustard gas. And it was created by Monsanto, the same company that created Agent Orange. Are you aware of that?
I've heard various things similar to that, and yes, and then of course each company, each corporation does something to alter the substance a little bit, and then they call it, now it's a novel product, and even though it's the same mustard gas, it's now mustard gas with this particular tweak and this thing, so it's a new product. And since the old product is going to run out of its patentability and will be able to, be cheap or generic, now they're going to demonize that one and promote the new one that has a little tweak. And that's basically every drug. Did that with Valium, for instance. Valium was for all intents and purposes a good product, and then they demonized it and came out with, because it was going public or generic, and they came out with Xanax, and said no, don't take the Valium, now you take the Xanax. It's the same thing with everything. Yeah. So, but I have heard, yeah. I haven't verified that, but I have heard similar things. Yes.
Well, back then, when I was going through it, they just came out with a new cancer drug. It was called Neulasta. Not Lunesta, Neulasta. And they experimented me on that with that drug. And I had horrible horrible side effects from that, and that's when it had to stop the treatments. But it amazes me how they treat these life-threatening illnesses with such toxic drugs, and it makes one wonder if the disease itself doesn't kill you, and the mustard gas doesn't kill you. I mean, it is so. In other words, it's amazing what our bodies endure, and that brings me to the point of the gentleman previously mentioned 5G, and I've been thinking about this 5G, and I'm actually terrified what this could possibly do to our bodies.
I think. Jules, you've studied 5G quite a bit, haven't you?
I have, and I mean, they don't think that it's going to cause any problems, but
well, wait a minute.
Officially, because they want to roll it out, and the
I know. I'm just joshing you. But I remember all the shareholders of all the companies got together and told their shareholders that there was going to be so many reported incidents of cancer and health problems that they should expect their stock to go down temporarily before it goes up when they introduce 5G. So, yeah. And then, of course, like those reports, they tell the public something else, right?
Well, Jules, are you aware that they're outlawing... I'm sorry to interrupt. Jules, are you aware that they're outlawing 5G technology in some countries, such as Israel?
Yeah, I saw that.
Somebody knows something that we don't. I mean, are we going to be the guinea pigs in the United States here for this technology? Is it going to take horrible deaths and illnesses for people to wake up to this? I mean, they haven't done enough research on it yet just to throw it at us, correct?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's all about money. When I saw the FCC chief, I don't remember his name, but he was the one that's before the current one, and he gave his speech about 5G, and he was like salivating as he's giving this speech about how much economic growth this is going to cause, and this is something, it's going to make the United States number one. But, you have to look at the frequencies that are being used, and there's a bunch of different spectrums. But once you get up into the higher range that's in the millimeter range, that's where I have some serious concern. Because like Clint was saying, there are frequencies, and I don't think they've identified the resonant frequencies that'll shatter cells. But I know once you get up to the next range, which is called the Terahertz range, and that's the naked body scanner type stuff, that there have been studies that show that splits apart DNA. So, who knows?
You said he was salivating, just like Donald Rumsfeld is salivating over the use of his baby, aspartame. Correct?
Yeah.
Donald
and his energy weapons.
Yeah. God help us all. Mr. Richardson, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, sir, and I hope you become a regular on RBN. God bless you now.
I appreciate it. I did my 2.5 years, so...
Come back. Come back.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for calling. Got time for one more caller if anyone wants to call in. As you were saying that it kind of cracks open or damages the DNA. That almost sounds. I mean, to be conspiratorial in a scientific way, that almost sounds like that's a great way to allow something like
CRISPR. I know, right? I think I covered that at the time. I could find you that article. It was out of MIT Technology Review. But I was horrified when I saw that. I mean, literally, it zip and unzip. That's what it was. It would unzip DNA.
Yes, I remember that too. Because we were the ones when they had the national, boycott the machine thing, and we're out there passing out flyers, and I'd printed off a bunch of stuff on radiation. There's no safe radiation, and then backscatter and how bad it is, and you give it to the sheep in line, and they all went through it. None of them said no. So it's just, what do you do? My old buddy Lark in Texas has called in. Welcome, Lark. How you doing, man?
Not too bad. Nice to hear your voice. Jules as well.
Hey, Lark.
Hey there. Naturally, I was a semi-regular listener of UCY.TV for those few years. So, I was sorry to see it go, naturally. But anyway, the reason I called, of course, is I wanted to remind you all that there is a chat room connected to the show, spingola.chatango.com. And I did put some things in there. It's New American, of course. But I remember back in the 80s and 90s knowing people that were so excited pushing these biotech startups, these IPOs and the like. And I remember then thinking about how mad these people were. They were so excited about the idea of course, it was all driven by the idea of that they could be successful, they could make a lot of money. And so, I like to write fondly, quote unquote, about this so-called technologists today, because I think about the so-called green technologies, genetics, robotics, information, and nanotech. And I can't imagine these people involved in these fields, letting up on this idea of innovation. Innovate or die. Innovate or die. And finally, I'd like to just go ahead.
It's an economic model, because this is growth or die, which to me goes against the conservative principle, right? But every economic model, every city, every county, every state, grow, but there's never a purpose to the growth. And what does that sound like? Cancer? Right? Why are you growing? Why does the economy need to grow? Why does the economy need to grow? It doesn't. But if you think it does, then you'll work overtime and you'll create this sort of cancerous growth with no purpose. And that's what we've been in for 100 years, since the Industrial Revolution, basically.
Something that might be worthwhile for the listeners and for y'all to check out is something called The Myth of Progress by Jacques Ellul. And then finally, I'll just say this about, I think it was Chance that called in. Actually, I rather think this idea that Israel doesn't have 5G has been debunked. I think that's kind of an internet rumor. Yeah. In fact, you can go on YouTube, and the channel name is Ahava528, AHAV as in Victor, A, and then the number 528. That channel, and that would be Shide Danan. And he's all over this 5G issue.
Oh, and he's in Israel, right?
He lives in the Golan Heights. Yeah. But I think he grew up in, I want to say England. And so, as he likes to say, he says, I grew up dreaming in English, but he's been in Israel so long that now I think at least half of his audience is a Hebrew audience, as he would say. So you'll notice if you go to AHAVA528 on YouTube, he's interviewed Vicki Davis and Patrick Wood and myself a couple times, and but again, he's all over this 5G issue, and he's gathered together some experts to speak to the issue.
I'll tell you, there's no. I just wish the people, of Israel, those who've declared their citizenship there, would realize that they're part of essentially the same things we are, which are Goyim, part of the nation that doesn't give a crap about them. And that's proven when you just look at some of the things like, the radiation poisoning that they've been using these radiated armaments. And the whole place over there is, people are, Yeah, it's bad enough to see the Arabs, the Arab people who are having these deformed children and horrible diseases, but then you see the Jews in Israel are also suffering from the same radiation fallout, etc. From it's because they don't give a crap about them. They're useful idiots. And just like we are, we are the ones that make the nation, give it power. They are the ones that make Israel have that power, and this combined, and he should know that Israel was part of it was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. It was part of the English Empire, lost in the 1200s and regained in the 60s. I mean, it was an English fight. It wasn't. So, I mean, nothing. The only thing that changed is that they now call it Israel instead of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So, I mean,
well, and of course, we're all compartmentalized. We've all been socialized. We've been at once enculturated. We learn how to use a fork, and at once we are being acculturated, which means that an alien force is bearing down on us at all times, trying to co-opt us, very much like the Borg.
And that's why I started using Spork. I'm the individual. I'm unique. I'm special. Thanks, Lark, for calling in.
Carry on. Yeah, thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. We got one more caller after the break here, and something else to read to you real quick. Funny stuff. We'll be back. I'm back. Don't have much time here, but I wanted to draw your attention to an article that was just sent from my trusty engineer here at RBN, and it's a Scientific American. An article from 2017. It says mail-order CRISPR kits allow absolutely anyone to hack DNA. Experts debate what amateur scientists could accomplish with the powerful DNA editing tool, and whether its ready availability is cause for concern. Oh, gee, do you think? And it starts off by saying that they're delivering E. coli bacteria as part of the DIY do-it-yourself CRISPR-Cas9 kit I bought online. Put it in our fridge next to the carton of eggs, strawberry jam, bottles of beer, and a block of cheese. Yes, that is how ridiculous this has become. Now, I wanted to draw your attention to a couple other ones. That this is a subject we didn't touch on today. We should have, just time limitations. We're also talking about transhumanism here. These two articles, I'll just give you the titles, and you can look them up for yourself on Scientific American. Lights, Cameras, CRISPR. Biologists use gene editing to store movies in DNA. The technique is demonstrated in E. coli, suggests a way to record events. So using DNA, artificial intelligence, or artificial life, in other words, which is really their end game, to create artificial life in everything, and using that DNA to store information. And to me, that's also a way, I think, to store memory, false memory, in synthetic biology. Synthetic biology, this is another headline, synthetic biology book published in DNA. The Data Storage Project represents the largest piece of non-biological data ever stored in this manner. You can look that up for yourself. Now, I would love to sit here and talk about that for another hour, but and let me just say thank you so much, Jules, for joining me today. We're going to just close out by taking one last call here. Murr in Wisconsin, welcome.
Oh, thank you. So good to hear you, Clint and Jules.
Thanks.
Remember, we're spiritual beings, first and foremost, and everything else comes after that. So seek your anchor and have faith and pull you through whatever. And people are so far ahead of all this New World Order stuff. That's why they have to put it in print and shove it at us all the time. Because as our consciousness is rising, we're all rising together with it. Like Lark was talking about Shy. Now, I was real resistant to this fella just because. And he really grows on you. He's very genuine. And like any interviewer, you'll have some interviews you question different things. But we learn different things from different people, and it doesn't have to all be valid, but we are spiritual beings. That's the main thing to remember. And we can heal each other with even telepathy at a distance. And I don't know, that may even be what Deanna's working on right now.
Yeah, that energy medicine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think
everything is frequency, right?
I think it's also a matter of us getting, and I've said this for years, of us getting together and doing our own thing. You know, how long can we just, sort of vegetate under this system that's designed to kill our spirit and kill our mind?
We are all together, though, in the spiritual realm, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. Thank you, Clint.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Jules.
Jules.
I get it. Thanks for... Jules, any last words real quick? I got to go.
No, I think we covered it all. And at some point, we could do a part 2.
Right? Just that last couple things I read. I know you'd have a lot to say on, man. Transhumanism and everything. So, all right, guys. Thanks so much for sticking around today. Deanna will be back next week, I believe. And this has been Clint Richardson. Thanks so much. Remember, hey, go to my website. Spread it around. Any help I can get is wonderful. We need each other. Thanks.